Welcome to the Heroes of Hommlet audio drama. This audio drama is a hybrid storytelling experiment inspired by projects like Tale of the Manticore, Legend of the Bones, and the Tales of Mystara. What you'll find here on the podcast portion of this project is an audio drama, much like you would hear narrated from the bones of an audiobook. You won't hear any dice rolls, and we won't talk about the rules of the game. If you're interested in that aspect of the project, please see our YouTube channel. There, we will run an actual play using Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition. This video series on YouTube is your companion piece to understand what dice rolls and what role-playing led to the drama that will unfold here on this podcast. A warning: this podcast will contain detailed descriptions of the occult, violence, witchcraft, death, and profanity. If this isn't to your liking, this podcast may not be for you. If it is, then welcome to Heroes of Hommlet. The village of Null began to fester with all manner of evil folk around 550 Common Year, culminating with the founding of the soon infamous Temple of Elemental Evil. The troubles began soon thereafter. Local caravans, gnomish clans, and the neighboring village of Hommlet became easy targets for bandits from that region. The people of the region endured more than a decade of raids and harassment, but they remained complacent until matters reached a head in 568 Common Year. The bandits and cultists constructed a moat house east of Hommlet to utilize as an outpost from which to launch further and more aggressive raids. Then the agents of good discovered that not only was the temple mustering a small army, but that the cult of elemental evil was actually under the direction of a powerful demoness. An excerpt from the writing of Mortal and the Mystic and his work, The History of the Battle of Emberty Meadows. The evening had begun to fade to silence. Market vendors packed the last of their stalls, gossiping about the day's business. Inside a quiet inn and tavern, our story begins. The Electra Meal wasn't the finest tavern in Verbalbank, but it certainly was the best spot for folk like our characters. Set near an open-air market, priced for dock workers, and accepting of anyone with coin and an appetite for strong drink and thick soup.
Thought you'd stiffed us this month,
said a well-built dwarf.
Nah, he crossed an ocean for a Yelling's tea,
said a pudgy, happy, cherub-faced halfling. Sorry, fellas, I got held up helping some pilgrims. Apparently their god didn't supply directions to them. The halfling pulled out 3 sacks.
Salt, tea, lantern oil, and a dozen coral heads.
A well-built, human man with a shaved head smiled and flopped out his own canvas sack onto the table. Swamp lotus, cured venison, about a dozen rabbit pelts, and at this point the dwarf's nose perked up and his paws wrapped around the canvas sack. And of course, yes, the finest wild mushrooms from the Cron Hills. The dwarf began to smell a large mushroom, began to cut it up with his knife, and dunk it into his hot soup.
Eating our goods is all he's good for,
said the halfling.
Drinking our profits is all you're good for. So, anything interesting this month out on the roads, boys? Said the tall, bald human. For the next few minutes, music, drinks, and laughter ensued. The friendly conversation over ale, the soup, and the music emanating from the bards who sang and played their instruments in the tavern. The three would exchange news, lore, and the events of the month. But eventually the crowd would begin to fade, and the music would begin to die. "Same time next month for this coven?" said a well-endowed barkeep, who appeared to be the proprietor of the Electromule. "Coven?" cried the dwarf. "Of course! Where else can we find witches' brew so tasty, served by actual witches?" The serving woman grasped the halfling's ear. "Easy there, my little friend, or you'll be in me cauldron." The four burst out in laughter at this joke. All right. Well, let's just see how this mule of yours has been doing, I don't trust you two to keep her in shape. It's a him. For the last time, it's a him. Healthy and employed, stable down at Talber's. Let's go check up so I can sleep off this ale. The halfling belched and lit up a pipe.
Dramatis Personae. Balding Pot Goldleaf. Balding Pot is a male halfling, age 32. He grew up in a village near the Lort Mills. As a teenager, he was forced to leave for angering the local sheriff. Having nowhere else to go, he left for the city, Verbobank. There he took work as a riverman and a cook. Life near the river introduced him to commerce, which then introduced him to the art, which is what thieves call their trade. Eventually, he was caught stealing a stolen candelabra. While in jail, he met Garl, who was in the clink for brawling. Eventually, the halfling and his dwarf friend got out, and they began heisting pirated or smuggled goods. They soon learned crooks don't call the constable. Eventually, they used their proceeds to go straight and began trading the high road with a cart and a mule.
Verbobank's market area, normally bustling in the day, slowly faded like the sun. By about 11 p.m., a couple of particularly industrious vendors were still cleaning their stalls. The chatter of the party echoed against the empty alleys. Dim light from a few street lanterns still lit the streets. The halfling and the dwarf pulled in a deep breath. The halfling nearly swallowed his pipe. Their infravision had previewed a grisly scene. 3 cloaked figures hacking away at a prone female. Crimson strips of blood arced across the lamplight. Her dying breath, "Ah!" "You best return to your beds or you're going to end up like her," shouted the larger man. Her death cries soon faded into a gurgle and the scene was clear. 2 hooded men knelt over her, weapons drawn. The third larger man, who had warned the party off, stood ready, a dagger flashing against the lamplight. The ranger, his eyes now adjusted to the light, stepped forward. "We're not going anywhere, and you're going down." The pale streetlight illuminated the blade in the hand of the tall, hooded figure. Both groups were held in a hypnotic gaze with each other, unable to act. In the indecision, the dwarf was frozen. The assassin hurled a blade with blinding speed. It sailed over the dwarf's head and landed with a clang behind our group of adventurers. The noise of the steel on the stone seemed to flood the party with adrenaline. The 2 other hooded thugs got up and rushed towards our heroes. They barely had time to draw their weapons. As the threat sobered our adventurers, they counterattacked. Our dwarf thrusted in with his spear. However, the miscreant had gotten in too close for him to hit. This distraction, however, provided our ranger an opportunity with his longsword, which he drove up and through the ruthless brigand's boiled leather armor. A popping noise could be heard as a lung burst. With another push, the blade's tip touched his spinal bone. Pulling the blade out of the brigand,
he fell into a sea of his own blood. The second brigand now turned, not noticing the halfling, who had ran a short sword across his hamstring. The brigand let out a scream. Ah! The halfling shouted, "Ha!" At that point, the brigand swung wildly with a hand axe, cutting across the dwarf's cheek. Now fixated on the hooting dwarf and the halfling, the dastardly thugs swung down. The dwarf deftly blocked, holding the cloaked man's torso wide open. The halfling lunged, but slipped in the gore of his fallen comrade. "Do it!" growled the dwarf. Our ranger swung his sword left to right, and the blade went from rib to gut, spilling out the man's innards with a sploosh onto the cobblestone streets.
The three heroes, now short of breath, surveyed the scene.
Garl, your cheek, you're cut.
Yes. Bleeding a little bit. Just a flesh wound, my friend.
Finn, who are these men?
The ranger looked up. He heard the footsteps of the large man, now sprinting off into a dark alley. He briefly looked up, looked down. Damn, he cursed. Balding pot. Try to get some rags. He turned his attention back to the now still woman. He tore pieces off of his own clothing for fabric and frantically pressed on the wounds. Her dress and her overjacket were soaked. The more he pressed, the more gore poured out of the woman, running through the little canyons between the cobblestones in the street. Garl pressed his fingers onto the woman's throat and looked up at Finn. Finn continued to press, not knowing what else to do. She's... Finn! She's gone. Garl had a hand underneath her head, his worn fingers trying to find a pulse.
I heard the screams.
A woman sprinted towards them with some rags. This older woman, clearly a merchant from the marketplace, walked over.
I saw them brigands lay into her. What a horror.
At this point, the barkeep had run over. Balding Pot and her held rags in hand. The two of them realized that there was no help to give.
This ain't no maiden. She's a church official,
said the older merchant.
I go every week. I thought I recognized her.
Ma'am, who are you? Said Finn.
I'm Sybil. I run the basket and weave with my son and daughter. We worship at this church of St. Cuthbert. She's preached there before. Yeday's her name, I think. Oh, may she rest with him.
A just God, ma'am. Lawful, stern, and just, said Garl.
Justice served, I think.
The group frowned at the halfling's poorly timed joke. Not quite, Balding Pot. One got away. Look, we need to bring her as fast as we can over to the church. Perhaps they can help her, or heal her, or use some of their clerical magic. Anything.
Oh, yes, sir. I'll make a stretcher, and I'll show you the way over.
I'm gonna go ahead and investigate these thugs here in the meanwhile.
The halfling began rifling through their pockets, grabbing whatever coins he could find. Sure, Look, Finn, are you sure you want to get involved with this business? Finn surveyed the dead assassins, looked around at the streets and the witnesses. I think we already are, my friend. Dramatis Personae. Finn Briggs. Finn is a human male, 26-year-old, independent ranger. He patrols a range going from the west edge of the gnarly forest, northwest of Verbobank, and all the way south to the Cron Hills. His mentor recently retired and left for places unknown in the bright desert. He knows Garl, and he's known him for a while. He met him while chastising some fur trappers, some of whom didn't take the warning very well. After being shown the unintended consequences of fur trapping, he felt Garl was remorseful and formed a bond with him. Finn showed him how to make a living trading the high road. Though he normally travels, camps, and lives alone, he has a network of friends, both human, demi-human, and animal, throughout Foryondi. The merchant woman hurried over with a canvas stretcher.
Come now. I'll show you. Let's get over there. I'll vouch for you. I saw everything. I saw you did what you could.
The group pulled the woman's body onto the canvas stretcher, blood still weeping from multiple wounds. The short, morbid walk over to the temple was filled with Sybil's wailing and an occasional night owl resident. The group arrived at a large but modest temple. Sybil rushed ahead and began knocking on a large brass knocker. After a few awkward minutes, a young man answered the door. He was dressed, but had the look of somebody who just woke up.
Ma'am, it's a bit late. Are you well? I'm Sybil.
She knelt.
I'm a servant of the cudgel. Hurry, the canoness has been felled. You must do something.
A panicked look set in on the young man's face, and he froze. He mumbled.
Oh, my word.
Is she... Oh, the blood. Son, snap out of it. Is the high priest here?
Yes. Yes, I shall fetch him. Bring her inside, up near the dais.
He opened the doors wide and hurried off, stumbling up the stairs. The group brought the body in, cradled in the now blood-soaked canvas hammock. Sybil shuffled off, sobbing and crying.
Finn,
the halfling said.
Look, there's doing good, and then there's being accused of murder. I'm not particularly interested in another trip to the brig.
Balding Pot, rest assured, they will know you're truthful as soon as they'll know you're lying. We're at the Church of St. Cuthbert. Dramatis Personae. Garl Sullyforge. Garl is a male dwarf, 56 years old. He grew up the poor son of a widowed rat catcher. His mother had died in the hateful wars. His father lost his hand, and his bitterness over the wars of the powerful instilled in Garl a desire to leave clan and dwarf class life and find his way in the Flanays. Garl eventually followed on with some trappers, learning snare making, skinning, and hunting. Eventually, Finn and some rangers stopped their wasteful trade. Garl, however, was spared the worst of it and learned to respect his prey. This didn't prevent him from running afoul of the law occasionally, and after being caught in a bar brawl, ended up meeting Balding Pot during a stint in the Verbalbank jail. Better or worse, running now just isn't possible, said Finn. An older man in a tunic, broad in the shoulders and tall, was followed by the acolyte. They shuffled down the stairs and over. The elder man's face was stern, and he scanned the body without saying a word. After a brief moment of awkward silence, he pressed his lips to her forehead.
Sister, he will bring justice.
His eyes turned to the party, gray, unblinking. He spoke almost to himself.
O Lord, may you grant me wisdom so that justice may be served.
He then turned his gray eyes to the party. Now, good citizens of Verbalbank, tell me what has transpired on this dismal evening. With Finn taking the lead, the party recounted the events. You may not share my faith, but you have justice and righteousness in your hearts. I am Waverly Rothery. I'm the high priest here at the Temple of St. Cuthbert. And you've already met my acolyte, Harold.
Harold Tippett's here. Well met, and thank you for bringing her here. We will take it from here.
He began to usher the party out. Not so fast, my zealous student. St. Cuthbert has brought us together, and he may require that we do more. The canoness was to return to the village of Hommlet. Turgeon is there now, and he must be given the news. I'm not certain you are prepared for such a journey alone.
But me? Go to Hommlet?
Stammered the young acolyte. Ranger, Finn, now at full attention, I wish to ask a favor. Will you escort Harold here to Hommlet?
Certainly, High Priest. Well, I'd like to help.
but that is a long journey for only two. My friends here, Balding Pot and Garl, are teamsters by trade. Perhaps they can be of help to the church. The rates on their cart are most reasonable. Even better, said the high priest. Turgeon, who lives there, is expecting his provisions. I'll pay your group my standard rate of 50 gold for an escort and the use of your cart.
But, sir,
stammered the acolyte. The halfling stood up in a full salute.
By the cudgel, sir!
Harold, prepare to leave in the morning. I have to attend to this, as he looked down at the canoness.
But, sir,
stammered Harold. No buts. You will lead this caravan. You are responsible for the provisions, and you are responsible for collecting any evidence related to this awful event. The high priest and a few clerics carried off the canoness's body to a back area. The young priest cleared his throat. You heard the high priest. I am Harold Tibbets, and I'll be leading this expedition. Excellent, my young man. How many of these expeditions have you led thus far? Said Garl. Well, none, though I,
Have you ever been to Hommlet?
Said Balding Pot. Not exactly. Exactly how? Said Finn. Well, I've heard of it, and I believe I've studied a map. Finn motioned for Garl and Balding Pot to cease their giggling. No problem. We'll certainly need your expertise and your help with the provisions, as well as collecting evidence. How about we see you an hour after dawn at the stables by the docks? We're staying at the Electra Meal. Yes. We leave tomorrow in the morn. Finn, was it? Yes. You've been to Hommlet, I imagine? Yes, my friend. I spend more time to the west, but I know the road there, and I've been a few times. Good then. You are the men, folk for the job. Very well. Good night. The priest bowed briefly and then ushered them out of the temple. The three adventurers then walked back to the docks and decided that they needed to walk around a bit.
Sirs!
Sybil had been packing up her stall. She walked over with something wrapped in a greasy rag.
I found this yonder, almost over to the stalls. 'Twas a dagger, well made. A bit dinged up, though, from hitting the cobblestones. Look.
She began to unwrap it. Balding Pot picked it up from her hands and looked down.
That was our friend's horrible miss. Thank you, Detective Sybil. Well, of course. I'm tired. I need to go to bed, but I hope you find the demons who did this.
The party gazed upon the dagger. It was well made, well balanced. Its hilt wrapped in leather, its blade looked to be made of cold iron, and an icon was emblazoned on the pommel. It was an eye, with flames on the top. The party retired to their rooms, their fates having shifted through chance, or perhaps something else. You've been listening to Heroes of Hommlet, an audio drama built on an actual play hosted on YouTube. The background music used in Heroes of Hommlet is licensed from tabletopaudio.com under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative 4.0 International License. If you want to leave feedback, have a question, or a comment, please visit our YouTube channel at 5 Magics Game Club, or just search Heroes of Hommlet on YouTube to find the actual plays. Thanks again for listening, and see you next session.